March 3, 2023. Judge Clifton Newman's voice echoed through the courtroom as he delivered the sentence. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Not once but twice for the murders of his wife Maggie and son Paul. Most people watching that day probably thought justice had been served. A monster locked away, case closed. But what if what's happening to Alex Murdaugh behind those prison walls is actually far worse than any execution? Stay with me because what you're about to hear might completely change how you think about punishment itself. Before we dive into Murdaugh's current reality, understand this. He's not just serving 2 life sentences for murder. In November 2023, he received an additional 27 years for stealing from his legal clients. Then, in April 2024, a federal judge added 40 years for financial crimes. The man who once walked the halls of power in South Carolina now lives in an 8 by 10 foot cell in maximum security. Here's what people get wrong. Most say they'd rather spend life in prison than face the death penalty. At least you're alive, at least there's hope. But is there really? Because the reality of what Murdaugh faces every single day might make you reconsider everything you thought you knew about which punishment is actually worse. Murdaugh is locked in protective custody at an undisclosed maximum security facility. The location stays secret because prison officials know someone with his profile doesn't stand a chance in the general population. Even they acknowledge that putting him with regular inmates would likely result in his death. So they've isolated him with about 28 other prisoners, former law enforcement, corrections officers, child predators, and other high-profile cases who all need that extra layer of security. His cell measures 8 feet by 10 feet. A bed, a toilet, and a sink. That's his entire world. But here's what most people don't know. From Friday evening to Monday morning every single week, he's completely locked in that cell with zero freedom of movement. 72 hours straight in a space smaller than most bathrooms, week after week, year after year until he dies. During weekdays, he gets about 8 hours outside his cell. But who's he interacting with? According to his own lawyer Jim Griffin, sex offenders are convicted of horrendous crimes. Murdaugh actively avoids these inmates. Even when he's free to move around, he's navigating a social minefield of people he wants nothing to do with. An ex-dormmate who lived with Murdaugh came forward to expose what he witnessed inside. He described the conditions as deplorable and revealed something that shocked even hardened inmates. When Murdaugh arrived on his first Monday of recreation time, a corrections officer walked over and handed him a brand new tablet still in the box with the clear film on the screen. Everyone else waited 60 days for used tablets, some with cigarette burns. Here's a man convicted of murdering his own wife and son getting preferential treatment from day one. The special treatment continued. Murdaugh allegedly got phone access others didn't. Then he sent an email right after arriving that leaked to the media, exposing the exact location of the protective custody unit. A location supposed to remain undisclosed for security. What happened next? Prison officials took down all tablets for everyone in the unit for 21 days while they revamped the email system. 30 inmates lost their only connection to the outside world because of one man's actions. But the revelations get darker. The ex-inmate claimed Murdaugh has been using his law background to help other prisoners, charging them for legal work. One detail stands out. Murdaugh allegedly does legal work for the inmate who makes wine in the dorm. Yes, contraband alcohol being produced inside maximum security. And it doesn't end there. According to the former inmate, drugs frequently enter the facility by drones or corrupt corrections officers. In July 2025, a state grand jury actually indicted 5 corrections officers for conspiracy and smuggling drugs and cell phones into McCormick Correctional Institution. The ex-dorm mate made a stunning claim. Murdaugh is allegedly the money behind some contraband coming in. Cell phones cost about $2,000 to smuggle in. Where's that money coming from? Supporters have deposited hundreds of dollars into his commissary account. Strangers fascinated by his case sending him funds. If true, Murdaugh has essentially recreated a version of his old life inside prison, using money and influence just like he did when stealing millions from his clients on the outside. But here's the reality that no amount of manipulation can change. No matter how many tablets or privileges he gets, he's still trapped. And he will be until the day he dies. Every morning when he wakes up, he faces this unchanging reality. There's no parole hearing to look forward to. No possibility of freedom. In South Carolina, life without parole means exactly that. You die in prison, period. Death row inmates face the horror of knowing their execution date is coming. But there's finality to it. Most wait an average of 20 years, but eventually their ordeal ends. With life without parole, there is no end. You watch yourself age in a concrete box, watch the world outside change without you, watch everyone you love move on or die while you're still breathing but not really living. Studies show prisoners serving life sentences without parole experience what researchers call civil death. You're alive but dead to society with no purpose, no future, no meaningful existence. Some criminologists argue this prolonged mental anguish is actually more severe than execution because the condemned person isn't subjected to decades of isolation and the gradual destruction of their identity. Murdaugh's situation is even more complex because protective custody means he's in a prison within a prison. He can't join programs that might give his life meaning. He can't work toward rehabilitation goals because there's nowhere for him to go. His lawyer Jim Griffin revealed something telling. Murdaugh wants to be moved to the general population. He'd rather take his chances on the yard than continue in isolation. A man so desperate for normal human interaction that he's willing to risk being attacked or killed. But the prison system won't allow it because they know he'd be a target. So Murdaugh remains stuck, too notorious to be safe, too alive to escape through death, too guilty to ever be released. He plays chess constantly according to his attorney and works as a wardkeeper's assistant, basically cleaning and maintaining his unit. Chess games and janitorial work until he dies of old age in that 8x10 cell. This is what the next 30 or 40 years look like for him. But December 2025 just threw everything back into the spotlight. The court clerk from his murder trial, Becky Hill, pleaded guilty to multiple crimes. She admitted showing sealed crime scene photos to reporters, lying under oath about it, taking illegal bonuses and promoting her book about the trial for personal profit. She committed perjury, obstructed justice, and violated her oath of office. This matters because Murdaugh's defense team has argued for years that Hill tampered with the jury, making comments designed to push them toward a guilty verdict so she could sell more books. 3 jurors confirmed Hill made statements that seemed intended to influence them. 11 others said she did nothing wrong. A judge previously denied Murdaugh's request for a new trial, but Hill's guilty plea changes the calculation. On February 11, 2026, the South Carolina Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on Murdaugh's appeal. His attorney Dick Harpootlian says they're cautiously optimistic, arguing both technical legal violations during the trial and that Hill's admitted misconduct calls into question the integrity of the entire proceeding. Here's the brutal truth, though. Even if Murdaugh wins his appeal and gets a new trial, he's not walking free. He's still serving 27 years for state financial crimes and 40 years for federal financial crimes. Even if a new jury somehow acquits him of murder, which seems unlikely given the evidence, he's still dying in prison because of the financial convictions. He's still facing the same existence, the same isolation, the same slow decline in that concrete box. Which brings us back to the question: death penalty or life without parole, which is actually worse? Most people instinctively say life without parole is better because at least you're alive. But existing in perpetual punishment with no hope and no end, is that really living? Murdaugh is 56 years old. If he lives to 80, that's 24 more years. If he makes it to 90, that's 34 years of waking up in the same 8x10 space with the same walls, the same routine, the same isolation. Knowing this is all there will ever be until his body gives out. There's a reason some lifers have said they'd rather be executed. Death row inmates have a date. They know when it ends. But life without parole prisoners face something different. The endless continuation without purpose or conclusion. Forced to exist in a state between life and death, neither fully alive nor mercifully deceased. Long-term prisoners, especially in isolation, experience severe mental health decline. Depression, anxiety, psychosis, memory loss, and complete emotional detachment are common. For someone like Murdaugh, who was once powerful, wealthy, and respected, the fall is even more devastating. From prominent attorney whose family controlled Hampton County for nearly a century to inmate number whatever in a cell barely bigger than a parking space. Does he deserve sympathy? Absolutely not. He murdered his wife and son. He stole millions from vulnerable people who trusted him. He destroyed countless lives. This isn't about feeling sorry for Alex Murdaugh. This is about understanding what life without parole actually means. The punishment we think is more humane than the death penalty might actually be more severe in ways most people never consider. With execution, suffering is temporary. Fear and anxiety leading up to death. Then it's over. With life without parole, suffering is permanent, continuing every day for decades until natural death finally provides release. Murdaugh experiences what some call the living death. He exists but doesn't live. He breathes but has no life. Every morning his eyes open to the reality that this is forever. No appeals will set him free. No parole board will grant mercy. This is his existence until his body fails, probably decades from now. Some argue that's exactly what he deserves. Others might say no human being, regardless of their crimes, should face that kind of prolonged mental anguish. Where do you stand? Is this justice or revenge? Life without parole might seem more civilized than the death penalty. It might make society feel better because we're not actively ending a life. But for the person living it, trapped in a cage for 30, 40, 50 years until they die of old age, it might be far worse than any execution. Alex Murdaugh will spend the next several decades in that cell watching himself age, playing chess with people he doesn't want to know, doing menial jobs to pass time, hearing about the outside world but never being part of it again. All of this knowing there is no escape until his heart stops beating. With his Supreme Court appeal coming February 2026, his case continues legally, but practically his fate is sealed. Whether he wins or not, whether he gets a new trial or not, he's dying in prison. The only question is how many decades he'll endure before that happens. So has this changed your perspective on life imprisonment versus the death penalty? Comment below, because once you really understand what life without parole means, you might never look at punishment the same way again.